Welcome to Verified Fears. The highways of Oregon and Washington disappear into fog so thick you can't see 10 feet ahead. Out there, in that suffocating gray, people have encountered things that shatter everything they thought they knew about reality. Truck drivers who've crossed these routes for decades refuse to drive certain stretches after dark. Families have called 911 from these roads, their voices frantic, describing things that shouldn't exist. Some made it out. Others were never found. Tonight, I'm bringing you 11 encounters from the fog, each one documented, each one unexplained, and each one more disturbing than the last. The road to Tillamook always carried a certain weight, especially at night. I had driven Highway 6 dozens of times before, through heavy rain and thinner fogs, never thinking much about the stories connected to it. But the first time I felt something unnatural, there was on a cold February night, when the mist didn't just hang, it clung. It wrapped around the windshield, thick and silver, swallowing the headlights whole. The line between the forest and the sky vanished, and the world turned into a single endless stretch of pale, ghostly gray. That was when I first heard about the man who was said to still work these roads long after he died. The story came to me through Evan, a foreman who had handled road maintenance for Washington County for nearly 2 decades. He was the kind of guy who didn't hesitate to climb under machinery or work in freezing rain. But when I met him for coffee late one night near Forest Grove, he looked worn down. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. Something deeper, like something had hollowed him out. He said he'd been avoiding late shifts ever since his friend disappeared 12 years ago during a mudslide cleanup near the Gales Creek Bridge. His tone wasn't dramatic or superstitious. It was the voice of a man haunted by something he couldn't reason away. The missing man's name was Aaron Cole. According to state records, he was a night construction worker in his late 30s, tall, quiet, with 2 kids in Beaverton. On the night of his disappearance, their crew had been repairing a damaged embankment after days of unrelenting rain. The slide had dumped wet soil and broken branches across the westbound lane near milepost 28. They worked well past midnight, and when Evan did his final check before packing up the gear, Aaron wasn't at his station. His reflective vest still hung on the guardrail, and his flashlight had rolled into the ditch, light flickering weakly in the fog. Search teams combed the area for 6 days straight. Drones, dogs, helicopters, nothing. They assumed he slipped and fell into the washout, swept away by floodwater rushing toward Gales Creek. But no traces ever surfaced downstream. No body, no gear, no logical explanation. The case was closed within months, written off as a workplace accident during extreme conditions. Everyone moved on, except for the ones who worked those roads after dark. Evans said he first saw Aaron again the following October. He had been called to the same stretch to repair signage torn by wind. Fog had thickened early that night, rolling off the forest like smoke. When Evan parked his truck, he saw a faint light ahead. Someone in a vest waving. The man was signaling him to slow down. Thinking it was a new hire, he followed the signal until his headlights illuminated the spot clearly. But as the beams cut through, the figure dissolved into mist. No footprints, no sound. Only the steady rain against the hood of his truck. He swore on everything holy he wasn't imagining it. After that, sightings trickled in from other drivers. Truckers, patrol officers, even 2 campers who took the wrong turn one night. All described the same image, a man in a wet, reflective vest, waving for help before vanishing near the western approach to the bridge. The town eventually gave him a name, the Worker of Gales Creek. For some, he was just an urban legend. For others, he was a warning. I didn't intend to believe any of this. Paranormal stories often take root in places where tragedy meets isolation, and highways are great breeding grounds for half-truths. But after weeks of reading accident reports and interviewing locals, the evidence didn't fade with scrutiny. It thickened. One report from 2017 noted a construction truck's onboard radio receiving interference near milepost 28, picking up faint transmissions of a man repeating coordinates and the phrase, "We lost the barrier." The coordinates matched the site of Aaron's last known position. That's when I decided to drive there myself. It was around 12:30 a.m. when I left Forest Grove and began the ascent. The fog came early that night, heavy and wet like the breath of something ancient. My wipers could barely keep up. The sound of rain tapping against the glass merged with the hum of the tires, creating a strange rhythm that lulled me into half-conscious focus. Every mile marker stood like a gravestone, simple, silent, patient. I passed logging roads swallowed by trees, their entrances glowing faintly from my high beams, giving the illusion of eyes watching from the dark. By the time I reached the Gales Creek Bridge, the world had gone utterly still. No traffic, no animals, just the smell of wet earth and pine. I parked my car on the shoulder and stepped out, the air biting cold even through my jacket. The silence around the bridge felt oppressive, dense enough to make every footstep sound wrong. My flashlight beam cut a narrow yellow cone into the fog, revealing nothing but slick asphalt and the silver arches of the bridge railing fading into whiteness. I called out, once, twice, just to hear my own voice anchor me. But then came something else. Static. Not from the trees or the rain, but from my car radio that I'd left on by accident. Through the static, a faint voice threaded, a man's voice, calm but strained, saying something about clearance and hold positions. It lasted only seconds before dissolving back into noise. The frequency wasn't one used by public broadcasts. It was listed for county emergency communications. I stood frozen because I recognized that voice. I'd heard a recording of Aaron Coles during an interview with the county department earlier that week. It was him. There's a certain terror that doesn't scream at you. It lurks in recognition, in the kind of certainty that gnaws instead of jumps. I returned to the car, trying to laugh it off, thinking maybe a trucker nearby was using the same frequency. I decided to leave, but my headlights flickered twice, then went out completely. The engine kept idling, but the road ahead fell into total darkness. Then, for barely an instant, someone crossed through my beams as the lights flashed back. The unmistakable outline of a man in a reflective vest, soaked through, waving both hands at me. I stepped out again, calling out, my voice cracking in the damp air. This time, I could smell fresh asphalt, the distinct pitch-heavy scent used on the highway, though I hadn't seen recent maintenance. I heard something metallic clanging in the distance, like tools striking a guardrail. It came from the far end of the bridge. I walked toward it, flashlight trembling. The closer I got, the more the fog moved, curling, folding, reshaping itself like it was breathing. Then I saw the vest again, hanging from the railing just as the reports described, glistening under a thin layer of water. Below it, the mud sloped sharply toward the creek. My light caught on something halfway down, boot prints spaced far apart, leading downward, and next to them, a single deep drag mark like something heavy had been pulled. I backed away. Every instinct told me not to climb down there, not in that weather, not alone. But then the radio flared again, louder this time. The same voice, clear as if standing beside me. Barrier lost, he fell through. Nothing else followed. Just that one broken phrase repeating, distorted and wet. By then, adrenaline had taken over reason. I started to climb down, slipping on the slick mud, flashlight beams shuddering with each movement. The fog below seemed thicker, almost pearly against the faint moonlight. When I reached the base, the ground was soft, soaked through. The creek's edge shimmered with small ripples that didn't match the sound of flowing water. That's when I noticed it. A reflective stripe partially buried under silt. I dug with my hands until it came loose. Part of a safety vest. Torn, decayed, edges stiff with age. The name patch was faded, unreadable. But the initials stitched faintly in black thread were AC. I don't remember climbing back up. What I do remember is the feeling of something following me. The sense of eyes right at my back, just beyond vision, patient and deliberate. When I reached the car, the headlights came back on, humming bright, as if nothing had ever happened. My watch said 3:12 a.m., though I could have sworn I'd only been there for 30 minutes. As I drove, I glanced in the mirror out of instinct, more than curiosity. The fog parted for a second, and behind me, at the bridge's edge, a single figure stood, illuminated faintly in the red cast of my tail lights. Waving. I reported everything the next morning to the county transportation office, leaving out the supernatural details. They sent a crew the following week to inspect erosion damage. According to the foreman, when they dug near the western slope, they found twisted remnants of old reinforcement wire and broken concrete supports, exactly where I had climbed down. Buried beneath, they found fragments of rusted metal consistent with a reflective vest clasp. No human remains, but something about the recovered soil samples suggested prolonged submersion in sediment. The department's official stance was simple. Nothing unusual discovered. But the workers refused to stay past sunset. 2 of them claimed to see a light flicker down the slope after dusk. One heard someone tapping on the metal guardrail in a steady rhythm, like hands striking it with impatience. That section was repaved and widened later that year, partly for safety, partly to discourage curiosity seekers. I drove the new stretch once, alone, just to see it during daylight. The asphalt was smooth, unbroken, the kind of modern perfection that hides history beneath it. But as I passed milepost 28, a faint shimmer caught my eye on the shoulder. A flash of something bright in the corner of vision, like sunlight hitting glass. When I slowed to look, nothing was there. Only a gentle breeze through Douglas firs and the faint, wet smell of tar. And still, I could swear I heard a voice in the static of the radio again. Some say the dead don't stay where they fall. They stay where they're remembered, where their purpose was stolen mid-task. Maybe Aaron never left because his job wasn't done. Maybe he waves not to warn us of danger, but to ask for help no one can give. Every time I think about that night, I imagine the fog rolling down from the mountains again, swallowing the roads, the trees, the bridges we built to feel safe. Somewhere within it, a man stands waiting with a flashlight and a vest that gleams faintly even in death, waiting for someone to see him long enough to finish what he started. And on some nights, driving through that same curtain of mist, the radio still crackles once or twice, always on the same stretch, always the same frequency. The voice, faint but unmistakable, says only this: barrier lost, hold position. Then silence, until the fog thickens again. On Oregon's roads, silence often means safety. But along Highway 6, silence feels like someone finally stopped calling for help because he realized no one was coming. There's a certain kind of fog that moves differently along the Columbia River Gorge. It doesn't roll. It drifts, patient and deliberate, as though deciding who deserves to see through it. On nights when it sinks low across Interstate 84, the world feels suspended between two nightmares: the restless water below and the lonely cliffs towering above. It was on one of those nights, years ago, that I first saw her at mile marker 123. I hadn't realized at the time that I would never truly stop seeing her again. I had been driving back from Pendleton after visiting my sister, long past midnight. The highway mostly empty, except for the occasional freight truck rumbling in the opposite lane. The rain hadn't started yet, but the mist was thick enough to wash out the stars, and every bend looked like a hallway leading deeper into nothing. My radio had gone silent somewhere near the Dalles, leaving only the hum of the road beneath the tires. It was an ordinary trip in every way. Until it wasn't. I caught sight of her just beyond the exit sign for Rufus, standing on the shoulder where fog met asphalt. She looked lost but calm, drenched from head to toe, even though the air was dry. I slowed down instinctively because she wasn't moving, just watching the road with vacant eyes. Her pale dress clung to her legs, and her long, dark hair seemed to glisten under the headlights. She looked young, maybe late 20s, but her face held an expression of exhaustion that didn't match her body. She didn't wave, didn't flinch as my car rolled closer. She just turned her head slowly, as if unsure whether I was real. Something in me wouldn't let me keep driving. I've told myself since then that it was decency, a sense of civic duty. But deep down, it was curiosity, a need to make sense of something my instincts had already labeled off. I pulled over about 10 yards ahead and left the hazard lights on. When I stepped out, the cold hit like needles. The fog hissed slightly where my breath met it, and the highway stretched away in both directions, empty and still. "Are you all right?" I called out. No response, just the sound of the wind slipping through the guardrail. When I turned on my flashlight, she was gone. I swept the beam across the shoulder, the ditches, the open field near the tree line. Nothing. Not even footprints in the wet gravel. I stood there for a moment, confused and slightly embarrassed. It's amazing how quickly the mind begins to question its own senses when faced with absence. I got back in the car, convinced that fatigue had played a trick on me. But as I merged back onto the blacktop, headlights cutting through another curl of fog, a faint outline appeared again in the rearview mirror. Just for a heartbeat, that same drenched figure, standing at the same spot, looking after me. I didn't sleep that night. After reaching home, I scoured local reports online, looking for missing persons along that area of I-84. I found nothing current, but deep in an archive from 1989, a brief article caught my eye. Woman identified in early morning accident near mile 123. Vehicle submerged after collision with guardrail. No witnesses. Her name was Emily Carver, a teacher from Hood River. The article ended with a small note. Hitchhiker reportedly attempted to signal aid moments before impact. Identity unknown. Weeks passed before I returned to that stretch of highway. But something in me needed to. There's an unspoken magnetism in trauma, even secondhand. We tell ourselves we're investigating, but what we're really doing is chasing ghosts we've already met. I drove out near midnight again in early spring, this time deliberately slowing as I approached the mile marker. The night looked almost identical to before. Heavy fog, low clouds, a kind of wet silence that soaked through your clothing. For several minutes, nothing stood out. Then I noticed it. A faint shape appearing just beyond the median light, motionless and barely visible. My chest tightened, though I forced my foot off the brake. The figure in white stepped forward. Same soaked dress, same long dark hair. I could see her reflection shimmer across the glass of my windshield as I drove past, but what froze me wasn't her appearance. It was her expression. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't lost. She looked almost relieved, as if recognizing me, as though she'd been waiting for me to come back. I pulled over farther ahead, but didn't get out this time. I stared into the rearview mirror, breath shallow. The road behind was empty. Just fog. The moment I exhaled, the radio, dead silent for hours, flickered to life. A low burst of static, followed by a woman's voice whispering unintelligible words. It lasted maybe 10 seconds before dissolving into nothing. The clock on the dashboard blinked 12:37 a.m. and then froze. Later, I would learn the accident report from 1989 listed 12:37 a.m. as the exact time of Emily Carver's crash. I've always been rational about the world. I don't believe in curses or wandering souls. I believe in psychology, in how guilt or fear can plant illusions so deep they grow roots. But this wasn't my guilt. I never knew Emily. Yet, after that night, she began visiting me elsewhere, in dreams, reflections, any place fog touched glass. Always silent, always near mile marker 123. Months later, I contacted the State Patrol office under the guise of research. The officer I spoke with sounded weary the moment I mentioned that stretch. He told me unofficially that dispatch receives dozens of calls every few years, reporting a barefoot woman walking that highway segment at night. Drivers often think they've hit her. Some swerve off the road or stop to help, only to find tire marks circling nothing. The patrol stopped logging those reports years ago because it kept confusing rescue teams. The officer's last words lingered with me. She doesn't haunt the place, she repeats it. I couldn't let that phrase go. So I drove there again, but not at night. It was early morning this time, pale sky over the gorge, light mist rising off the water. The area looked harmless in daylight, even beautiful. I parked near the marker and climbed down toward the riverbank, trying to get a sense of where her car might have gone off. The slope was steep, riddled with old driftwood and small stones polished smooth by rain. I found what looked like the remnants of a guardrail, curled inward like melted bones. Near it, buried in weeds, was something reflective. I brushed the dirt away and uncovered a fragment of blue glass. A car mirror, sun-faded. A faint manufacturer's mark stamped the back. The model matched the car in the 1989 report. I stood there for a long time, holding that mirror shard, the wind rustling the reeds. In its cracked reflection, I thought I saw movement behind me, just fog twisting maybe. But when I turned, a trail of wet footprints led up the slope toward the road. I followed them. They stopped halfway, dissolving into gravel. No car passed during that time. No sound except the whisper of wind through pine. That night, the same dream returned. The one where I'm driving through rain, headlights cutting through fog, and someone appears on the shoulder. I stop. She walks up to the passenger window and knocks softly. But when I roll it down, she doesn't speak. She just points ahead, up the road, at something I can't see. Then the car fills with water, rising fast. Until my lungs burn from holding breath that isn't mine. I always wake up before it reaches my mouth. By late summer, I began receiving phone calls with no listed ID, always around midnight. If I answered, nothing but faint static hummed for several seconds, followed sometimes by a single wet gasp, like someone surfacing from deep water. When I stopped answering, Voicemail notifications appeared blank, no recordings attached. But the timestamps always aligned with those calls. I started leaving my phone in another room to sleep, but sleep rarely came easy anyway. Every time I drove near the dolls, I avoided the stretch near mile 123. Until one night, something forced me to return. It was early October, a year since the first sighting. Oregon rain isn't like most rain. It arrives heavy and stays longer than it should. That night, it was relentless. The windshield blurred everything, wipers struggling to keep pace. I wasn't supposed to be there. I had taken a detour after a landslide closed part of another route. But somewhere between exhaustion and muscle memory, I realized too late where I was. The sign appeared through the sheets of rain. Mile 123. The moment I saw it, my headlights dimmed and the radio clicked alive again. Her voice came this time, clearer than before. Not static, not imagination. Just one sentence, fragile as breath. He didn't stop in time. For a heartbeat, the road ahead flashed white, a reflection of something slick and moving. I slammed the brakes, heart slamming harder. A second later, a truck roared past in the opposite lane, air pressure shaking the car. If I hadn't slowed, its spray of water would have blinded me. I sat there gripping the wheel, trembling, while that same voice whispered one more time through the static. Now you did. And the radio went silent again. No one believes this story when I tell it. Some shake their heads. Others say fatigue makes memory unreliable. Maybe they're right. All I know is that each foggy night since then, I see her silhouette on the edge of my vision whenever headlights pass through mist. Always facing traffic, never looking away, soaked to the bone. As if reliving the instant before her final impact, waiting for someone else to make it right. A few months after that night, a trucker contacted me after finding my article online. He said he'd seen her too, same stretch, same night I described. Only his version included something more. He said when he stopped and checked the asphalt afterward, he found a set of footprints crossing directly in front of his rig, small and bare, leading into the fog toward the river. And among them, fresher prints moving beside hers. Men's prints. My size. He asked if I ever walked out there, maybe during the day. I told him I hadn't. But the truth is, sometimes I dream of doing it. Standing again by that guardrail, looking down at the water that took her, hearing the faint echo of a crash replaying itself under the surface. In the morning, I always wake up with my socks damp and gravel on the floor beside the bed. People like to think hauntings are punishment. I've come to believe they're repetition. Some stories don't want to scare you. They want to correct what went wrong. Every time I drive past mile 123 now, I keep the headlights low, the radio off, and my eyes fixed on the fog ahead. Because somewhere out there she's still waiting for another car, another chance, maybe another me. And each time the mist thickens, I can almost see her reflection flicker on the glass, mouthing the same thing I wish I could forget. Now you did. There's a stretch of I-5 near Ridgefield, Washington, a quiet exit between farm country and industrial sprawl that no one thinks twice about during the day. But after midnight, the place takes on a different character. The road hums in a low, endless drone, and the fog thickens with the kind of density that turns headlights into halos. Exit 22 isn't remarkable, just another ramp leading to nowhere towns and shuttered gas stations. Yet, every few months, dispatch receives the same distress call from that exit. Same voice, same words, from a phone that hasn't been active since 2008. I first heard about it from a former emergency dispatcher named Carol Winslow. She'd worked for Clark County for nearly 30 years and wasn't the kind to romanticize nonsense. But when I met her, she looked haunted, like she carried something she'd stopped trying to forget. She told me the call had come in again the week before, October 14th, right around 12:43 a.m. Same time as always. The voice of a woman, distorted by static and rain, repeating, "Please, someone's coming, headlights, please," before the call cut off. When I asked who the caller was, Carol slid a file across the table without a word. Inside was a copy of a 2008 missing persons report. Rebecca Lane, 27, last seen leaving Vancouver after visiting her parents. She had called 911 that night to report a car following her near exit 22. Dispatch kept the line open for 7 minutes before losing the connection. When officers arrived, they found her car about 60 yards down the embankment, hazard lights still blinking. The passenger side door was open, but there was no sign of her. The phone she'd used was found inside, screen shattered, battery dead. The official cause of disappearance, inconclusive. The strange part wasn't her vanishing. It was the calls. The 911 system upgraded its infrastructure in 2016, migrating everything to a digital network. Yet the call, complete with the same timestamp and the same audio data, still came through every year, logging itself automatically. Same file name, same duration, same 7 minutes of rain and breathing and panic. They used to assume it was an error from their system backup until the voice changed. Carol played one for me right there in the cafe, audio transferred from her private drive. The sound was faint, filled with soft static, but clear enough to make out. A woman's voice filled the space between words and breathing. "He's walking toward me. Please, please hurry. I can see the headlights. He's not stopping." Then silence. But about 5 minutes in, when her voice should have been gone, another sound came. Male, quiet but deliberate, whispering something undecipherable, followed by 3 distinct knocks, like someone tapping the side of a car. The timestamp showed that the new section hadn't existed in the original 2008 recording. I went quiet, the air between us cold and stale. Carol finally said, "That's why I retired. I can't keep answering someone who's been dead longer than my last promotion." Of course, logic demands an explanation. Data corruption, sound layering, ghost frequency, something. But logic also has a threshold, and I've learned how thin that line gets when you start investigating stories that refuse to age. And I asked for permission to visit the area where Rebecca's car had been found. She warned me to avoid it at night, and the way she said it carried something beyond superstition. The next evening, I went anyway. The fog had already come down hard over Ridgefield, pressing low across the fields and damp asphalt. Highway noise faded behind me as I turned onto the narrow service road parallel to exit 22. The air smelled like damp weeds and exhaust, the kind of scent that clings to you after long rain. My cell signal dropped near the interchange, the bars flickering before vanishing altogether. Ahead, the road curved sharply toward a fenced-off lot where authorities had once staged their search. From that bend, the slope down toward the ditch was still visible. Steep, tangled with brush, and littered with bits of rusted metal. The ground there looked soft, even from the pavement, rain pooling in shallow depressions. I parked near the barrier and cut the engine. The silence pressed in as close, the sort that feels alive. I left the headlights on and walked toward the signpost for exit 22, the numbers barely visible beneath grime. Each step crunched gravel underfoot. When I reached the guardrail, The world dimmed even more. Sound seemed to fold over itself. Even my breathing felt heavy. In that thick quiet, I almost didn't notice the faint hiss behind me. It took a few seconds to realize it wasn't the wind. It was my phone. The screen had come to life on its own, the signal bar flickering once. Then the screen glitched. Flicker, static, and a single notification appeared. One missed call, unavailable. The time, 12:43 a.m. I didn't move. The call icon blinked for several seconds before vanishing. Before I could process it, the phone vibrated again. This time, incoming call. Same source. Static hummed faintly beneath the ringing, like whispering through a radio. Against every instinct, I answered. For a moment, there was nothing. Then came breathing. Soft, scared, shallow. A woman's voice followed, identical to the one from the recording I'd heard. Please, someone's coming. I can see you. Why aren't you helping me? There was no one else on the road. No lights behind, no cars passing. Just fog stretching endlessly. I tried to speak, to ask who she was, but the signal fractured into harsh white noise. Then something else bled through the distortion. A low hum that didn't sound mechanical. It rose and fell like someone whispering below their breath. Beneath it, 3 dull, rhythmic knocks. Knock, knock, knock. The same sound from the recording. I hung up, nearly dropping the phone. The call log showed nothing. The battery level had dropped 30% in under 2 minutes. My first thought was to leave, fast. But before I could return to the car, a faint light appeared halfway down the embankment. Faint amber, like from hazard lights. The same place where her car had been found 15 years ago. I should have left right then. Curiosity won instead. I climbed down carefully, mud slick beneath my shoes. The closer I got, the warmer the light appeared, not harsh or artificial, but soft, pulsing faintly, as if reacting to my movement. When I reached the bottom, the air smelled faintly metallic. I followed the reflection until it caught the surface of something half buried in the weeds. A rear-view mirror. Its glass fractured and glinting, identical to the model of Rebecca's 2008 Toyota sedan. That's when a noise echoed from behind me. A faint thud, like a car door closing. I turned sharply. Through the fog, faint beams of light approached from the main road above, cutting downward through the mist. At first, I thought someone had stopped, a patrol car maybe. But the lights didn't cast shadows properly. They shimmered, flickered, bending around the fog instead of piercing it. Then I heard the voice again, closer now, projected through the air itself, untraceable. Please, someone's coming. Followed by what sounded unmistakably like crying. The fog began to shift, swirling slowly, as if stirred by unseen movement. For a fleeting second, a shape emerged at the edge of my vision. A woman crouched near the mirror, one hand braced on the ground. Her face was indistinct, blurred by motion or light, but the impression of wet hair sticking to her skin was vivid. Every instinct screamed to step back. But my body wouldn't move. The air trembled with a low hum, the electrical buzz of power lines overhead, mixed with something living in its rhythm. Rebecca, I said without thinking. I don't know why I used her name. Maybe to convince myself she was still human, still something rational. The figure turned her head slowly, and though her face remained obscured, the motion felt deliberate. Her head tilted slightly, as though she'd heard recognition. Then the headlights from above flared bright, the shape gone in an instant. The fog collapsed inward, leaving only the rhythm of dripping rain and the faint beep of my car's low battery warning echoing from up the road. I climbed back shakily. heart hammering. When I reached the pavement, I caught my reflection in the passenger window, pale, drawn, and behind me, faintly, the curve of another silhouette standing at the guardrail, looking toward the ditch. Not a trick of light, just the faint outline of someone standing perfectly still. I drove for miles before pulling over again. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The clock on my dashboard read 1:07 a.m., but my phone still showed 12:43. It stayed that way for the next hour, unresponsive until dawn finally broke and the signal returned. The missed call had disappeared, but in my audio files, a new recording sat atop the list, time-stamped 12:43 a.m. It was only 7 minutes long. Listening to it the next morning in daylight made it worse. The first 3 minutes were the same. The woman's voice crying, then silence. But midway through, another voice joined. Mine. My own recorded breathing, muttering faint phrases I didn't remember saying. "Can you hear me? Who are you?" Followed by the echo of her last line. "He's here." Then static, ending abruptly. I wanted to believe the file had been altered, that maybe I'd recorded something accidentally through the phone's mic. But the metadata told a different story. The file type matched emergency system logs, not mobile device recordings. Same format used by dispatch centers. Weeks later, I returned to Ridgefield one final time during the day. The fog had burned off, the sky bright over distant silhouettes of wind turbines. The exit looked painfully ordinary beneath sunlight. New paint, trimmed grass, the world in motion again. I spoke with a highway maintenance crew nearby, asking if they'd ever found remnants of older wreckage during cleanup. One of them, a tall man with a faded safety vest, paused before answering. He said last year they'd dug up something not on record. The hollow frame of an old cell phone, corroded and cracked, but still containing its SIM card. They'd handed it to law enforcement, who never reported back. He shrugged as if it meant nothing. Whatever that phone carried, it's still speaking. Carol called me 2 months later, voice trembling. She'd come out of retirement briefly to help train new dispatchers, when another instance of the call triggered. Only this time, the message was shorter, barely 10 seconds long. No rain, no pleading. Just silence, then a final whisper. No one came for me. I stopped answering unknown numbers after that. Still sometimes, driving late between Seattle and Portland, I noticed those empty exits slipping by, fog rising like exhaust ghosts around the ramps. Every exit has its story, but only one keeps calling. Once in a while, when the signal cuts for no reason and the phone vibrates against the console, I see it. Just one notification, always the same message. One missed call, 12:43 a.m. Exit 22. I never answer anymore. But sometimes, late in the hum of the highway, I swear I still hear the faint whisper of someone breathing through my radio speakers, waiting to finish a call she started years ago. I've learned to respect late-night drives, especially along the Oregon coast. Something about the sound of the waves colliding with fog and the long curling asphalt makes you feel like the world stretches too far for its own good. When the highway winds through empty stretches of pine and marshland, you start to sense a rhythm, how isolation beats like a pulse out there, steady and patient. I've taken that drive dozens of times, usually alone, passing through Tillamook, Florence, Coos Bay, all the nameless places where the ocean hides right beside the trees. But one night, south of Florence, I stopped at a gas station that, according to every record and map I could find later, never existed. It was around 1 a.m., the highway barely visible under shifting fog. My tank was low, dangerously low, and I hadn't seen a single open business for miles. I told myself I'd push until Reedsport, though my gauge was blinking beneath empty. Then, through the haze, a faint orange glow appeared ahead. Neon signage flickered behind the fog, half swallowed by the trees. Gas! Open 24 hours. I almost laughed from relief. The building looked weathered but real. A rundown one-story structure with 2 old-style pumps out front, the kind that still had analog dials. A rusted pickup sat by the side of the building, driver's door closed, but windows fogged from the inside. The faint smell of gasoline and wet wood drifted in the air. When I stepped out, the night seemed quieter than before. No insects, no ocean wind, just the soft clicking of the fluorescent sign overhead. Inside, warm light spilled through grimy windows, and the faint sound of a radio played something old, maybe from the 60s. I walked up to the front door and pushed it open. Immediately, the bell above it gave a faint metallic ring, and a scent hit me. Dust soaked in gasoline, old oil, faint tobacco. The clerk behind the counter looked up from behind a newspaper. Mid-50s maybe, with thin hair combed neatly back and deep lines across his forehead. His name tag read Earl. He nodded as if recognizing me, even though we'd never met. "Evening," he said in a calm drawl. "Rough night to be out this far." "Yeah," I said. "Didn't expect anything open." He smiled faintly. "Most nights, neither do we." Something about that line stuck with me, but exhaustion had softened my sense of strangeness. I told him I needed to fill up, and he pointed toward the far pump. "Use number 2. Number 1's had ghosts in the seals since spring." He chuckled lightly, maybe as a joke, maybe not. As I filled the tank, I kept glancing around. The fog thickened, wrapping everything in dull silver. The only light came from the lamps above the pumps and the hazy orange glow within the store. I noticed something odd. No insects hovered near the lights, not even moths. The night didn't feel alive. It felt paused. When I went back inside to pay, Earl was looking out the window, his posture oddly fixed. He glanced at me only once before saying, "Heading south means trouble tonight." I hesitated. "Why's that?" He turned fully now, eyes heavy like they were carrying memories that hadn't faded right. "Tide's not done swallowing," he said softly. "Wasn't finished last time neither." The words made no sense, but they carried weight. Maybe I looked confused, because he quickly added, "Storm rolling in, washes out the lower roads. Ain't safe past Siltcoos this time of year." He scratched his temple, gaze distant. "You from around here?" "No, just passing through," I said. He nodded slowly. "Always are." He handed me my receipt, but when I glanced down, there was no date printed, just a ghosted string of faded numbers and the name of the town. Siuslaw Station. I'd never heard of it. When I looked back up, he was staring again, expression unreadable. You see a fog like this, you don't drive blind through it. It remembers the ones who did. I thanked him, trying to keep the conversation polite. But before I turned to leave, the radio behind him crackled violently, cutting through with static. Then came a faint female voice, distorted but urgent, saying something about water rising and the south route. Earl moved quickly and switched it off. The sound vanished as if nothing had interrupted it. "Storm warnings," he muttered, always talking louder than they should. He gave a slow nod toward the door. "Drive careful now." Outside, my car gleamed under the station lights, droplets forming faint trails across the glass. For a second, I thought I saw movement inside, something shifting in the passenger seat. But when I looked closer, nothing was there. When I started the engine, my dashboard clock blinked oddly. 1 a.m. sharp, same as when I'd first arrived. I hadn't been there long enough for the fill-up, or maybe I had. The world outside the car felt suspended, the fog thicker now, rolling in waves like surf. As I turned back toward the road, Earl stood by the doorway watching, his silhouette framed in the glow. I waved briefly. He didn't wave back. The drive south felt endless. The fog grew so dense that the road seemed to dissolve just a few yards ahead. I could barely make out the reflective edge lines. No cars passed from either direction. Each time I thought about turning on the radio, silence felt safer. About 15 miles later, the glow of the station faded behind me completely, swallowed by the rise of the cliffs. Rain started then, sudden and sharp. Somewhere near Siltkoos, the road split near a narrow bridge. The left path led deeper inland, while the right followed the shoreline. The GPS kept freezing, recalculating repeatedly, as though unable to decide where the highway actually was. I pulled over to check my phone. All networks showed no service. The map froze with a faint outline of my current location labeled Siuslaw Bay. That name again. By then, rain had slowed into mist. I could hear waves somewhere beyond the dark, a hollow rhythmic crash hidden behind the fog. The car clock still read 1 a.m. It was then that my headlights caught something ahead, a sign, half-rotted but legible beneath lichen. Siuslaw Station, 0.3 miles. The same name from the receipt clung to the damp air like déjà vu. I stared at it for a long moment, logic unraveling. I had driven south for 15 miles, but apparently hadn't moved at all. Against reason, my fuel gauge had dropped again, nearly empty. I turned the car around, intending to go back the other way. But the road behind me was gone. Not literally gone, just erased. No faint tire marks, no light in the distance. Only the dense silver wall of fog, alive with faint shifting inside it. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I forced myself forward, retracing the direction I remembered. Minutes passed, maybe more, until the faint orange glow reappeared through the haze. The gas station again. Relief flashed through me for a moment, until I noticed the details had changed. One of the fuel pumps was missing. The truck that had been parked by the side now sat in the center lot, door hanging open. And inside the station's windows, no light glowed. Still, I had no choice. My gauge was on fumes. I pulled in again slowly, watching for signs of life. The sign that once read, "Open 24 hours," now flickered sporadically, only flashing, "Open 2." The fog pressed hard against the windows. When I stepped out, the air smelled different. Briny, colder, as though seawater had replaced the wind. The front door was unlocked. The bell chimed faintly when I entered, but no one stood behind the counter. The radio was gone, just a dark square on the shelf. In its place, a stack of receipts sat, yellowed and damp. I lifted one from the top. Same format, same missing date. But this time, where the name should have been printed, the ink had run into a single line. Beneath it, in faint blue pen, someone had handwritten, "Tide wasn't done swallowing." Something dripped on my collar. I glanced up. Tiny streams of water leaked through hairline cracks in the ceiling tiles, forming dark patches on the floor. It sounded like the faint tick of a clock, steady and deliberate. Outside, low thunder rolled, though it was too constant to be thunder. More like a roar from far off. I walked toward the counter to see if anyone was back there. But when I leaned across it, My reflection in the dusty glass beneath the counter looked slightly wrong, not misaligned, just lagging behind. The figure in the reflection blinked a second later than I did. The hum of fluorescent light grew louder, almost vibrating in my eardrums. And far behind me, somewhere within the aisles, came a faint shuffle. I spun around, pulse hammering. Nothing moved, yet the air looked disturbed. Faint ripples in the fog, drifting through a broken side window. Outside, something massive shifted beyond sight. Water breaking against something that shouldn't be there. I stepped backward toward the exit, heart pounding. When I pushed open the front door, fog poured in, thick and wet, coating my face like river air. The lights outside flickered again and then dimmed completely, leaving only the car headlights casting two pale cones across the lot. For the first time, I noticed that everything sat perfectly still. Not a sound, not a flicker of wind. The rain that had been falling only moments ago had stopped mid-drip, frozen in the air like suspended glass. Through that stillness came one faint sound, something creaking from above, wood straining, followed by the soft crash of waves. Impossible here, miles from the shore. My mind couldn't reconcile where it was coming from. I ran to the car, jumped in, turned the key, nothing. Dead. The headlights dimmed and clicked off. When I looked up, the fog outside pressed against the windshield, a milky barrier so dense it seemed physical. Then, faintly through it, a shadow began to form. Tall, thin, moving slowly past the pumps, gliding rather than walking. I could see the faint outline of that same clerk, Earl, his form rippling as though seen underwater. He stopped near the pump, his face turned toward me, mouth opening as if to speak through the glass. The noise that came wasn't a voice. It was the deep groan of something wooden, bending under water pressure. Then, abruptly, everything went dark. When I came to, daylight burned through my windshield. The fog was gone, the lot empty. No building, no sign. Just overgrown grass and cracked asphalt leading nowhere. My gas tank was brimming full. The clock still read 1 a.m. The faint sound of waves lingered, receding with the wind. Later that day, I stopped in Florence at the police station to ask about Siuslaw Station. The officer on duty laughed, saying no such place existed. Closest thing to that name is the Siuslaw River, but no station out there. Maybe an old stop years back washed away when the bay overflowed. When I showed him the receipt, he took one look and handed it back carefully. "Happens more than you'd think," he said. "People come through town talking about stops up the coast that shouldn't be there. Roads remember what they lose." That night, I checked my mileage. It showed 40 miles since Florence, yet I hadn't driven more than 20. My trip odometer reset itself back to 0 when I wasn't looking. And although I tried to dismiss it, I kept hearing the faint rhythm of water dripping somewhere nearby when I parked for the night. The smell of gasoline, too faint to be real, hanging in the air like memory. Sometimes I dream about that foggy road, endless and gray. The static hum of fluorescent lights behind dirty glass, and a voice, low and patient, whispering from somewhere just outside sight. The tide wasn't done swallowing. When I checked the GPS weeks later, south of Florence, I noticed a new entry on the map between mile markers 193 and 195. A point labeled simply Siuslaw Station. Not a business, not a landmark, just a dot that appears for seconds before vanishing again. I never tried to go back, but every time the ocean fog rolls in, I catch the faint scent of gasoline mixing with salt. And I remember the clerk's words. Most stations sell fuel by the gallon. That one sold something else entirely. Passage, maybe, to somewhere the tide never stopped taking. There's a long stretch of Interstate 5 between Vancouver and Chehalis that feels different after midnight. The woods pull tight along the roadside, the air hangs heavy with rain, and the hum of truck engines becomes the only heartbeat of the highway. You can drive for miles without seeing another pair of headlights. That's where the stories about 11.3 FM come from. A pirate frequency that cuts through static out there, always at the same time. 11:03 p.m. I'd heard whispers about it for years. Truckers mentioned it in diner conversations, like small talk masking fear. They said the broadcast wasn't music, it was a voice. A man's voice describing the same stretch of highway you were driving. He'd talk about fog density, road curves, even the sound of your own tires. Some swore he described things that hadn't happened yet. Others just said he spoke directly to them, naming their route, their cargo, sometimes their thoughts. I never believed any of it, until I heard it myself. It started on a Sunday, heading north from Longview. I was doing a story on independent truckers, sleep deprivation, logistics, the quiet monotony of the road. My rental car's radio had weak reception. Most stations broke into white noise between towns. Sometime after passing Vader, the dial froze at 11.3 FM, though that frequency shouldn't exist on any standard receiver. The sound was faint at first, just whispers through static. Then, as if I'd tuned a station precisely, a man's calm voice came through. Low, deliberate, unhurried. "Northbound, silver sedan," he said. 2 miles from mile marker 63. You're listening, aren't you? My hand froze. I was driving a silver sedan. My headlights had just passed that marker. I told myself it was coincidence, a prank maybe, or interference from a local CB broadcast. But his voice continued. "Keep to the right lane. Do not look at the reflection beside you. It isn't yours." I laughed nervously, glancing around out of habit. No other vehicles in sight, just fog moving like ghosts between pine silhouettes. The rearview mirror reflected nothing but the red taillights of my own car. Then, out of the corner of my eye, movement flickered in the passenger window, quick, like something shifting against the glass. My pulse spiked. I didn't dare look directly. Instead, I turned up the volume. The voice kept speaking, describing fog patterns, exact weather, the faint smell of burning rubber I now realized I could smell too. The more he described, the more the inside of my car seemed to align with every word. 11:3, he said softly. "The road knows who's listening. Stay between the lights." Then the signal cut off, replaced by static so sharp it pierced like tinnitus. I pulled over at a rest stop near Napavine, hands shaking. I checked my surroundings, empty lot, one flickering lamppost, vending machines humming beside a locked restroom. My phone showed no service. When I searched for 11.3 FM again, the radio refused to tune, skipping straight from 11.1 to 11.5. The frequency didn't exist anymore. That would have been the end of it. But I made the mistake of mentioning it 2 days later to a long-haul driver named Ray at a diner outside Tacoma. The moment the words, the 11.3 FM, left my mouth, he went pale. His fork clattered onto the plate. He asked what day and time I heard it. When I told him, he shook his head. "Once you tune in," he said, "it tunes back." He explained his version between hesitant sips of coffee. Years back, around the same stretch of road, he'd picked up the frequency while hauling freight through fog. The voice described a deer on the shoulder, told him to slow down before he hit it. He did, and when he looked again, there was no deer. Just a man standing in the breakdown lane, waving. The man's face was pale, eyes dark like caves. Ray swerved, nearly jackknifed the rig, and when he looked again, both the man and the voice were gone. But every night since, his radio turned on at 11:03, no matter if it was unplugged or off. Sometimes, he said, the voice described dreams he hadn't had yet. I left that diner unsettled, but not convinced. Rationality clings hardest before it breaks. The next week, I drove the same stretch again, this time deliberately tuning the radio at 11 p.m. Rain hit the windshield like pebbles, and the landscape blurred. The dial refused to stay silent. The frequency reappeared on its own, faint static forming slow words. The voice returned. Same one, too calm to be human, yet too precise to be machine. Back again, he said. Curiosity is how it starts. Then the echoes follow. The station had no name, no music, just dense background noise, almost like wind recorded inside a tunnel. I tried to record it on my phone, but the moment I pressed record, the audio cut out entirely, as though something jammed the mic. The voice spoke again, smoother now, almost amused. Don't bother recording, you'll only capture yourself. The dashboard lights dimmed slightly, flickering with the faint hum beneath the signal. It sounded like breathing, slow, steady. Through the windshield, rain streaked vertically down, but when I looked sideways, it seemed to fall in reverse, climbing up toward the sky. The voice lowered. You're driving north, but they buried the road wrong. It still believes south is the way home. Static swallowed the transmission, but the air in the car didn't return to silence. There was still sound, whisper thin, like fingers brushing fabric. I glanced toward the passenger seat and froze. A faint impression sat there in the fabric, as if someone had leaned back moments ago. The temperature dropped steadily. My breath fogged in front of my face. Then came soft tapping, 3 times, near the dashboard vent. When the signal broke again, the voice sounded frustrated. You shouldn't have looked away. I don't remember pulling over. Just the sudden realization of sitting at the side of the highway, rain tapping against the hood. My radio screen blinked repeatedly, cycling through random numbers, none matching any frequency. The clock on the dash flickered between 11:03 and blank. My phone had recorded nothing, but its battery showed 11%, drained from nearly full. When I returned home, I couldn't shake it. I told myself it was fatigue, suggestion, coincidence. Yet every night after that, I woke precisely at 11:03 a.m. or p.m. No alarm, no reason. Always to faint static from somewhere inside the room. It didn't come from my phone, nor any nearby device. Just sound, lightly vibrating the air, enough to make the windows hum. I drove a different route weeks later, avoiding I-5 completely. Yet the voice returned through Bluetooth speakers, even though the radio wasn't tuned. There you are, it said gently. You left your reflection back on the highway. Shouldn't drive too far without it. That was the first time I noticed something strange about mirrors. My car mirror had developed a faint blotch near the center, an oil-like smudge that blurred whenever headlights passed. When I wiped it clean, shapes briefly shifted under the swirl. Indistinct, shadowed. I stopped checking altogether. I reached out to a broadcasting engineer from Seattle, hoping to debunk this thing once and for all. His name was Greg, and he handled frequency mapping for local emergency services. When I mentioned 11.3 FM, he looked skeptical, until I gave him the coordinates where I'd heard it. He said, "That's dead spectrum. No authorized transmitter should reach out there, not even a test signal." He offered to scan the area with his own receiver. The next week, he called back sounding shaken, "We caught something broadcasting from a moving source," he said. "Same frequency, but the transmit origin kept shifting by mile increments. It was moving with traffic flow." He played a short sample through the phone. Muffled voice, only one legible sentence. "You left something behind." The call cut suddenly. I tried reaching him again the following day, but his voicemail greeted me instead. The recording strangely distorted, as if someone had replayed his voice through a speaker underwater. 2 days later, his number stopped accepting calls altogether. I told myself to quit chasing the story. Some things don't want to be explained, they want to be repeated. But it didn't matter anymore. Once you hear 11.3 FM, it finds you again. Always at 11:03, always describing something close enough to touch. Months passed. I stopped driving that route, sold the old car, changed phones. Yet sometimes, while parked in silence, my speakers come alive, unprompted, static breaking into faint voice fragments. Never the full broadcast, just pieces. Left side mirror, or headlights off, or the worst one, you're not alone in the car. I began keeping journals of every occurrence, the dates, times, words. Patterns emerged. Every recording had background noise. Rain, faint traffic, one recurring sound behind it all, a soft hum on a low F frequency, matching the tone of the average human heartbeat under stress. The voice occasionally mentioned others, as if addressing multiple listeners. They're still on the road. They can't pull over. I used to think it was random people tuning in by accident, caught in the same phenomenon. Now I'm not sure. Last fall, I returned one final time to the same section of road. It felt like unfinished business. The air was sharp, clear, no fog this time. I tuned every frequency I could, but all stayed silent until 11:03. Then faint static bloomed again, like breath on glass. "Welcome back," said the voice. "Third lane, don't swerve." A flash of headlights blazed from ahead, a semi drifting across lanes. My instinct kicked in. I hit the brakes, horn blaring. The truck missed me by inches before screeching back onto its route. I sat there, breath shattered, heart beating through my ribs. Another second's difference, and I'd have been gone. When I tuned away from the frequency, everything went dead silent. Like the air itself had been exhaled. The radio screen dimmed permanently after that. No static, no sound, just emptiness. The thing about strange signals is that even when they stop, something lingers. A residue burned into memory. Now, at exactly 11:03 each night, every electronic device in my house falters for a moment. The lights dim, the internet drops, and inside that second of silence, I hear it faintly again. The familiar words, steady, patient, closer than before. Keep to the right lane, and keep listening. I stopped driving long distances after that. The comfort of motion feels dangerous now, like bait dangled before something waiting. Still, some nights, lying awake, I turn on the radio anyway, just to prove I'm not afraid. The dial never lands on 11.3 anymore. It skips every time. But that doesn't matter. Because the voice isn't on a station anymore. It's closer. Sometimes, late enough that static creeps through the air vents. I swear I hear faint breathing from behind me in the dark. A whisper near my ear, low and familiar. Northbound, silver sedan. That's when the power goes out and the clock reads only one number before the room floods with silence. 11:03. If you've ever driven the backstretch of US Route 30 between Rainier and Astoria, you've probably passed a gravel turnout hidden behind moss-choked guardrails. Most people miss it completely because the state stopped maintaining it sometime in the 1980s. It used to be a small rest stop. 2 picnic tables, a soda machine, and a public phone booth standing alone by the trees. The whole place smells like rain-soaked cedar and rust. You wouldn't think anything of it, except that at night, there are lights that flicker there when no power runs through. I came across it by accident almost 6 years ago. I was driving from Portland toward the coast after a long recording job, around 2 in the morning. Fat rain blurred the windshield, and my wipers screeched every few seconds like they were begging to stop. I'd been on that road before, but never in such thick fog. The mist wasn't natural. It felt layered, as if the road had been caught between 2 different nights. My phone showed no signal past Klatskani, and the highway turned narrow and slick as I climbed the hills. That was when I saw it. The faint yellow of a streetlight, just one, out in the trees. I slowed down thinking it might be a rest area. But when I turned onto the gravel lot, I realized nothing here belonged to this decade. The structure that should have been a restroom stood half collapsed, covered in ivy. The vending machine by the entrance had a faded Coca-Cola logo from the 70s. I stepped out into the cold air, the smell of wet bark strong enough to sting the nose, and for a moment it felt like stepping backward in time. Everything was soaked and heavy, but the air had that stillness that only follows after a storm. I was exhausted, disoriented, and buzzing from caffeine. I told myself I just needed 5 minutes, a quiet stretch to breathe before driving again. I went to lean against one of the picnic tables, but when I rested my hand on it, the wood was dry, perfectly dry in a landscape dripping with rain. My skin prickled. My breath came out white, though the night wasn't that cold. That's when I heard it. The distant hum of a soda machine compressor kicking on. I looked over at the vending machine in disbelief. Its red light flickered once, twice, then glowed steady. I walked closer, half expecting to hear a generator somewhere nearby. But there was no sound except the surrounding river of fog and that faint electric hum. Coins rattled faintly inside the machine, like someone just finished paying. The keypad, dusty and cracked, blinked faintly behind its fogged glass. For whatever reason, I pressed one of the buttons. The machine groaned, a low internal rattle, and a can clunked into the dispenser slot below. I froze. When I reached down, my hand found a chilled aluminum can, beads of water sliding down the surface as if it had just left a cooler. The label was warped, unrecognizable, maybe an old brand. But the air around me had gone still again, and far off towards the tree line, I thought I heard footsteps, soft, crunching through wet gravel. I turned sharply, flashlight cutting between the trees. Nothing. Just mist curling upward like smoke. The footsteps stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. I got back into the car, placed the can on the passenger seat, and sat in silence, letting the engine idle. The can hissed faintly, slowly deforming inward as if losing pressure. Something about that sound filled me with dread. I left without looking back. By the time I hit Westport, the fog had lifted. I didn't think much of it until 2 weeks later, when insomnia and curiosity convinced me to check if that spot really existed. Online maps showed the road, but no turnout, no rest area. Old satellite images from the 1980s, however, showed a small gravel lot labeled Rainier Rest Area, closed. Clicking through historical views, it simply vanished after 1992. Removed completely, trees swallowing it whole. That was the moment it became an obsession. A month later, I returned in daylight. The forest had changed color, early fall bleeding through the leaves. I found the turnout easily enough, though the road signs had rusted beyond recognition. There were no lights, no machines, nothing electrical in sight. Yet the faint imprint of the rest stop was still there. The outline of where a building once stood, the broken base of a lamppost, twisted rebar spearing through the moss. At the edge of the lot, I noticed something unusual. A cracked plastic name tag half buried in dirt. The name still legible, Diane. Beneath it, the emblem of Oregon Department of Transportation. Something about that tag felt wrong, like it had been waiting. I pocketed it without thinking and walked toward where the vending machine had stood. That's when I noticed a new detail. The ground was marked with faint, circular scars, as though the footprints of tables or benches once bolted there. But beneath one, the nearest to the edge of the trees, something metallic gleamed. I knelt, brushed the dirt aside, and uncovered half of an old car key, corroded but intact, connected to a ring that bore a small brass tag. On it was etched, "Rest Stop Staff, Maintenance." When I turned it over, there was a blackened notch carved into the edge of the brass, almost like the key had been burned. And beneath where I crouched, the air felt oddly warm, like standing above running machinery. A soft rustle stirred in the woods then, faint but rhythmic. Not footsteps, more like metal scraping lightly across tree bark. I stood up fast and started toward the car, unease prickling along my neck. When I reached the door, a sudden sound echoed through the trees behind me. The unmistakable clink of glass bottles shifting inside a vending machine. I didn't turn around. The next few nights were restless, plagued by an uncanny dream. I saw the same rest stop bathed in gold evening light, new and pristine. People laughed near the picnic tables, eating burgers from paper wrappers. Children played near the fence, and sunshine glistened on freshly cleaned cars parked by the lot. Then the image blurred like an old film reel burning through, colors bleeding into gray. Water began seeping up through cracks in the pavement, spreading fast, swallowing tires, tables, everything. In that vision, I saw Diane, the woman whose name tag I'd found, standing waist-deep in that rising water, one hand gripping a soda can, the other reaching toward me, mouthing something I couldn't hear. Assuming my mind was just weaving details together, I decided to drive there one final time. Closure, at least that's what I called it. Though looking back, obsession may be a kinder word. It was mid-November, fog rolling inland from the Columbia River, thicker than it had been before. I reached Route 30 around 1:30 a.m., headlights cutting through low clouds, rain whispering against metal. When the turnout appeared, something looked different. Faint light, soft white this time, glowed through the fog from the center of the lot. The rationale part of me said maybe someone was camping there with a lantern. But the rest of me already knew this was wrong. As I turned the car off, the dashboard clock froze briefly at 1:33. The digital numbers flickered once, then dimmed. The air grew warmer again, carrying the faint scent of gasoline and damp cloth. The sound of humming drifted faintly through the fog, the same low electric hum I'd heard months ago, the sound of a fridge compressor or vending motor. Yet there were no working utilities out here, not for decades. I stepped out slowly, each breath hanging thick in the cold. The light ahead pulsed faintly, not steady like a lantern, but oscillating, almost breathing. I followed it until the shape became clear. A vending machine standing upright, where I knew there hadn't been one before. Same red paint, same old logo, no visible power source. Inside, bottles lined the shelves in perfect symmetry, each label clean and new. I stood frozen, the hum vibrating in my chest. The glass showed a faint reflection of myself, though for some reason it didn't move quite the same. My reflection's mouth seemed to part, whispering something, though I heard nothing. Then, beneath the sound of the machine, came another, a slow dripping somewhere behind it, like water falling onto metal. I leaned closer, trying to make out what my reflection was saying. It wasn't in sync anymore. It mouthed the word, "Leave." And then, barely visible behind the reflection, was a faint silhouette just over my shoulder. I spun around, flashlight snapping to life. For a moment, I thought I saw her. A woman standing near the trees, work uniform soaked, O-dot badge glinting faintly. Her features were indistinct, blurred by distance or fog, but her posture, the stillness of it, was unmistakable. She held something metallic in one hand, light flickering in the other. Then, just as quickly, the shape blinked out. I ran back to the car, heart pounding hard enough to shake my hands. When I started the engine, headlights rolled across the lot and everything vanished. The vending machine, the light, even the picnic table outlines, gone. Just a few patches of gravel glimmering with rain. I didn't stop driving until I reached Astoria. At a diner there, bleary-eyed, I told the owner what I'd seen. He looked at me quietly for a long time before saying that the old rest stop had flooded back in 1980 during a heavy storm. 2 state maintenance workers had been trapped during a landslide. One was pulled out 2 days later. The other, her name was Diane, was never recovered. They closed the site the following year. That night, I took the name tag from my pocket where it still rested. The surface had tarnished slightly, but for a moment it felt almost warm to the touch. I left it on the diner counter, thinking maybe it should stay somewhere real for once. Yet, halfway through the drive home, something metallic clinked faintly in the cup holder. The sound was identical to a coin dropping through a vending slot. When I checked, a soda can sat there, damp, cold, label half peeled, printed with a company logo that hadn't existed in 40 years. Now, whenever I drive that stretch of US Route 30, I avoid looking toward the forest side of the road. You can tell where the rest stop once stood by the gap in the trees and a break in the old guardrail, like the land hasn't quite healed. Fog often lingers heavier there than anywhere else. And sometimes, if conditions are right, a solitary light glows faintly through it. Some nights I wonder if she ever left. If Diane's last duty was to keep that rest stop spotless, machines full, tables dry, even after the flood erased it. Maybe she still clocks in somewhere beneath that wet earth, waiting for drivers who lose their way in fog too thick to tell what decade they belong to. I still keep the can on my desk, unopened. The condensation has never dried, even years later. I've thought about throwing it away countless times, but something stops me each time. The faint hum that sometimes escapes it when the room grows silent enough, like the compressor of an old vending machine that doesn't exist anymore. Some places along the coast aren't haunted in the usual sense. They're stuck, caught in loops between what was and what should have ended. That rest stop isn't evil. It's just doing what it was built for, waiting for travelers who need a break. But the ones who stop sometimes don't start again, trapped between memory and the next mile marker, replaying a moment that weather can't wash away. Whenever I drive past now, I only whisper, "Not tonight," under my breath. Windows up, headlights steady. The fog parts briefly, as if listening, and the road continues on. Still, every once in a while, the odometer blinks back to 1:33 a.m., and I feel that same soft vibration in the air. Somewhere, a machine hums faintly alive, dispensing things to drivers who aren't supposed to exist anymore. And in that sound, mixed with the rain and distant hum of tires, I swear I can almost hear the echo of her voice, calm and worn. Rest's free tonight. Keep the change. There's a bend in Highway 504 near Mount St. Helens that locals know to avoid after dark. It's not marked on tourist maps, and there are no warning signs. Just a simple guardrail painted white and rusted at the seams. The road curves sharply there, hugging the side of a steep drop that leads into a dense ravine thick with Douglas fir and blackberry bramble. During the day, it's just another stretch of asphalt carved into the foothills. But at night, when fog rolls down from the mountain, people say you can see them. A family frozen in a station wagon from the early 1970s, parked just beyond the guardrail, as if they never quite finished the drive. I first heard the story from a park ranger named Owen, who'd worked the area for over 20 years. We met at a coffee shop in Tootle, and he told me he didn't believe in ghosts until he saw the car himself. It was late autumn, he said, the kind of cold night where your breath hangs in the air like smoke. He'd been patrolling after hours, checking for illegal campers near the blast zone perimeter, when his headlights caught something metallic, glinting through the trees. At first, he assumed it was abandoned equipment or an old campsite marker. But when he pulled over and walked closer, he saw the outline of a station wagon, mint green, boxy, unmistakably from another era, sitting upright just past the guardrail. Inside, he said, were 4 figures. A man in the driver's seat, hands still on the wheel. A woman beside him, face turned slightly toward the back seat. 2 children in the rear, one pressed against the window. None of them moved. Owen described their posture as frozen mid-motion, like a photograph caught between frames. He called out, thinking maybe they were stranded or in shock. No response. When he approached the vehicle, fog curled around it so thick he lost sight of the ground. He reached for the door handle, and his hand passed through it. That's when he turned and ran back to his truck. By the time he looked again, the fog had thickened, and the car was gone. Only tire tracks remained, pressed deep into mud that shouldn't exist on that steep incline. When he reported it the next morning, other rangers nodded knowingly. They'd heard similar accounts for years, always near the same spot, always after dusk. Some said the family had been there since the mountain erupted in 1980. Others claimed the wreck happened years earlier, before the blast reshaped the land. I wanted to see it for myself, not because I believed in apparitions, but because stories like this always have roots. Trauma buried in geography, memory clinging to place. I drove out one evening in early November, the sky overcast and heavy with the promise of rain. Highway 504 winds through some of the most haunting terrain in Washington, carved by ancient lava flows and shaped by catastrophe. The closer you get to the Johnston Ridge Observatory, the more barren the landscape becomes. Gray soil, skeletal trees, remnants of a world reshaped by fire and ash. I reached the bend just before twilight. The guardrail stood exactly as Owen described. Simple, weathered, slightly bent inward at one post as if something had struck it long ago. Beyond it, the slope descended sharply, choked with vegetation that looked darker than the surrounding forest. I parked my car on the shoulder and stepped out into air so cold it stung my lungs. Silence pressed in from all sides. No birds, no wind, just the faint hum of distant water trickling somewhere below. I climbed carefully over the guardrail, boots sliding on loose gravel. The descent was steeper than it looked, every step uncertain. Branches scraped against my jacket, and moss-covered logs blocked parts of the path. About 20 yards down, I found the first piece of evidence. A fragment of chrome bumper, half buried in soil, corroded but unmistakable. Nearby, shards of green paint clung to bark where a tree had grown around something metallic. I knelt and brushed dirt away, uncovering more fragments. Plastic dashboard pieces, a cracked rearview mirror, part of a seatbelt buckle frozen in rust. Then I smelled it. Faint but unmistakable. The scent of old vinyl and something chemical, like antifreeze mixed with damp earth. The air grew heavier, warmer despite the dropping temperature. That's when I heard it. The soft creak of metal settling, like a car door opening slowly. I turned sharply, flashlight cutting through the dimming light. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw the outline of a vehicle. Mint green, boxy, sitting upright where no car could possibly be. Then fog rolled in fast, swallowing everything. I climbed back up quickly, heart pounding, hands scratched from grabbing at branches. When I reached the guardrail again, I looked back down. Nothing. Just trees and mist and the faint impression of something that shouldn't have been there. But when I turned toward my car, tire tracks appeared on the gravel shoulder beside mine. Wide, old-style treads that hadn't been there when I arrived. They led to the edge of the guardrail and stopped, as if the vehicle had simply driven over and vanished. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the image in my mind, the outline of that station wagon, the smell of old upholstery, the sound of settling metal. The next morning, I visited the Cowlitz County Historical Society and asked if they had records of accidents along Highway 504 before the eruption. The archivist, an older woman named Margaret, looked at me carefully before pulling a slim folder from the back. Inside were incident reports, most typed on faded paper. One caught my eye immediately. A family of 4, Robert and Linda Carson, and their 2 daughters, ages 7 and 9, reported missing in October 1972 after failing to return from a camping trip near Spirit Lake. Their car, a 1971 Plymouth satellite station wagon, mint green, was found weeks later at the base of a ravine off what's now Highway 504. The vehicle had rolled, coming to rest upright against a cluster of trees. All 4 bodies were recovered, but the cause of the crash was never definitively determined. Investigators suspected a combination of fog, speed, and unfamiliarity with the winding mountain roads. The family was buried together in Castle Rock. Margaret closed the folder quietly. "People still see them," she said, "especially when the fog comes down thick. Some say they're still trying to finish the drive home." I returned to the site one more time, this time just after midnight. Fog had rolled in heavy, and bourgeois, reducing visibility to barely 10 feet. I parked in the same spot and sat in silence, engine off, headlights cutting 2 pale beams into the mist. Minutes passed. Then, through the fog, a faint glow appeared. Not headlights, but something softer, like interior cabin light. It pulsed gently, rhythmic, almost breathing. I stepped out of the car, boots crunching gravel, and walked toward the guardrail. The glow intensified. Through the shifting fog, I saw it clearly this time. The station wagon, parked at an impossible angle, half suspended over the drop. The doors were closed, windows fogged from the inside. All 4 figures sat exactly as Owen had described. Father gripping the wheel, mother turned toward the back seat, children pressed against the glass. Their faces were indistinct, blurred by condensation or something deeper. But their stillness was absolute. I called out softly, "Are you all right?" No response, just the faint sound of breathing, slow, steady, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Then the little girl in the back seat turned her head slightly, palm pressed flat against the window. For a moment, our eyes met, or at least I felt them meet. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. Behind her, fog curled upward from beneath the car, rising like breath exhaled from the ground. I took a step closer. The fog thickened instantly, swallowing the vehicle whole. When it cleared seconds later, the car was gone. Only the faint impression remained in the wet moss. 4 shallow depressions where tires had pressed into earth that shouldn't hold weight. And on the guardrail post nearest to me, condensation had formed in a strange pattern. Handprints, small and child-sized, as if someone had gripped the rail from the other side. I left quickly, hands trembling on the wheel. But as I drove away, my rearview mirror caught something that made me brake hard. In the dim red glow of my taillights, the station wagon reappeared briefly behind me, headlights off, following at a distance before fading back into the fog. I didn't stop again until I reached the highway junction, miles away. Later, I learned from a geologist that the 1980 eruption fundamentally changed the topography of that area. What was once a steep but navigable slope became a fractured, unstable hillside prone to mudslides. The ravine where the Carsons' car had been found was buried under layers of volcanic debris, reshaping the land entirely. Yet the reports continued, always the same family, same car, same bend in the road. Some believe trauma imprints itself on landscape, especially in places shaped by catastrophe. Mount St. Helens didn't just erupt. It rewrote the memory of the land, burying stories beneath ash and stone. Maybe the Carsons are part of that memory now, replaying the final moments before everything changed. Or maybe they're still searching for the road they lost, trapped in a loop between the world before the blast and the one that came after. I haven't driven that route since. But I've spoken with others who have, hikers, truckers, late-night travelers, and their stories align with mine. The fog, the glow, the station wagon suspended impossibly over the drop. One woman told me she saw the father wave at her, slowly, deliberately, as if asking for help she couldn't give. Another man said he heard children laughing faintly through his rolled-up windows, even though no one was there. The most unsettling account came from a tow truck driver who was called to the area after a minor accident nearby. While waiting for the other vehicle, he walked to the guardrail and looked down. He swore he saw fresh tire tracks leading into the ravine, tracks that matched the width and tread pattern of a 1970s station wagon. When search and rescue checked the next morning, they found nothing. Just moss, trees, and the faint chemical smell of old car fluid seeping from soil that had been undisturbed for decades. I keep a photo of the Carsons on my desk now. A faded newspaper clipping from 1972 showing the family smiling beside their station wagon before the trip. Robert wears a plaid shirt, Linda holds a thermos, and the girls stand in front, arms around each other. They look happy, ordinary, alive. It's hard to reconcile that image with what I saw on the mountain, the frozen figures, the fog, the impossible presence of something that shouldn't exist. Maybe they're waiting for closure, or maybe they're simply stuck in the moment before everything went wrong. Either way, the road near Mount St. Helens remembers them. And on nights when the fog rolls down thick and the air smells faintly of old vinyl and earth, travelers still see them, a family behind the guardrail, suspended between memory and the mountain that buried their story. Some say if you stop and watch long enough, you'll see the little girl's hand press against the glass one more time, condensation blooming where her palm touches. And in that fog, faint words form on the fogged window, written backward as if from the inside. Help us go home. but no one ever does. Because the thing about hauntings shaped by geography is they don't need rescue, they need witness. The Carsons aren't asking to be saved. They're asking to be remembered. And every time someone sees them, every time fog curls around that guardrail and headlights catch something that shouldn't be there, they are. Over and over, endlessly until the mountain forgets or the road finally washes away. There's a strip of old highway that runs through Aberdeen, Washington, parallel to US 101, where the fog seems thicker than anywhere else along the coast. Locals call it the Quiet Mile. The road's official name is Simpson Avenue, but past midnight, it stops feeling like part of town at all. The street lights there flicker weakly, casting dull amber light across closed stores and boarded windows. It's a road that feels stuck, like it doesn't know what decade it belongs to anymore. I ended up on that stretch by accident, one of those long drives where the world feels blurred and half real. I'd been heading south from Ho Chi Minh after a video project, the kind of job that leaves you exhausted but restless. A sign promised motel lodgings ahead, simple and cheap. I remember checking the time, 12:11 a.m. Rain had started again, soft but relentless, tapping out a rhythm against the windshield. My phone battery was nearly dead, GPS frozen. When the first neon light appeared through the fog, it felt like relief. The sign buzzed above the mist. The Aberdeen Inn, vacancy. The red lettering flickered unevenly, half the bulbs dead. The building itself was small, 2 stories, with maybe a dozen rooms and a single lamp glowing outside the manager's office. It wasn't warm, but it was light in a sea of dark. The gravel lot was empty except for one dusty blue pickup parked crooked near the lobby. Only its rear license plate reflected the headlights. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the rain thud onto the roof. There was no wind, no passing cars, not even the distant sound of ocean. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of cleaner and wet carpet. The air was too warm, like the space was overcompensating for something cold outside. The fluorescent light above buzzed in long, uneven pulses. I rang the bell on the counter once. A few seconds later, a man stepped out from a door behind the desk. Tall, balding, wearing a white shirt tucked too tightly at the waist. His eyes were almost colorless, pupils sharp pinpoints even in the dim light. "Just one?" he asked without looking up. "Yeah," I said. "Just passing through." He nodded slowly, producing a small brass key from under the counter. No computer, no paperwork, just that. An old tag stamped, "Roommate." "How much?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "You'll pay when you leave." Before I could answer, he pressed the key into my hand. "Top floor, last on the right. Keep the door locked. We've had break-ins from the dunes." I nodded, uneasy. But exhaustion made me compliant. The hallway leading to the stairs was dim and smelled faintly like wet plywood. The carpet sagged underfoot, spongy from moisture, and the walls were lined with faded floral wallpaper curling at the edges. Half of the bulbs overhead had burned out completely. Roommate was smaller than I expected. A narrow twin bed, one table lamp, and a television bolted into the corner. The air inside felt humid, thick, like it had absorbed every breath that ever passed through. Still, the place served its purpose. I dropped my bag near the door, locked it behind me, and collapsed onto the bed. The sheets smelled faintly metallic, like old water pipes. I remember hearing the rain stop abruptly, as if someone had turned off the sound itself. Total stillness filled the space. Then, faintly through the wall, came a low hum. Deep, rhythmic, like an air conditioner or generator. But there was no vent, no machinery visible anywhere. I got up and pressed my ear to the floor. The sound was stronger below, shifting between frequencies in a way that made my chest feel tight. When I turned to look out the window, I froze. The motel lot below looked wrong. The neon sign was gone. The light outside the office had vanished. The entire building seemed shrouded in darkness, except for one dim bulb over room 8, mine. I tried opening the window, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was rusted shut. I pressed my forehead against the glass, squinting. Across the road, the fog had thickened into wall-like gray, impenetrable. No movement, no headlights, no night sounds. Only that low, endless hum leaking up from beneath the floor. I switched on the small television, thinking maybe noise would help. But when it flickered to life, it showed a grainy feed of the motel's parking lot. One continuous shot from a fixed camera somewhere outside. The timestamp at the corner read 12:11 a.m., the same time I'd arrived. I turned the knob to change the channel, but the image stayed the same. The lot, empty. The single blue pickup still parked crooked near the office. Then, after a few seconds, I realized. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat now. The cabin lights glowed faintly. I stared, heartbeat thudding. The figure moved, slowly turning its head toward the camera, toward me, or maybe the lens of some unseen viewer. I couldn't make out a face, but the shape was unmistakable. Human, upright, still. I reached for the power button, but before I pressed it, the screen glitched. For half a second, the image of the lot froze, and the timestamp jumped to 12:11 a.m. again. That's when the knocking started. 3 slow knocks on the wall behind the bed. I turned, pulse pounding in my ears. The sound came from the adjoining room, steady, deliberate. I called out, trying to sound casual. "Hello? You okay in there?" No answer. Just another set of knocks, slower this time. I pressed my hand flat against the wall, feeling a faint vibration under the wallpaper, like something alive was shifting inside the walls themselves. When I glanced back, the image on the TV showed movement again. The blue pickup's headlights flashed once, and then the lot went dark completely. The feed dissolved into static. I unplugged the television. The static continued anyway. That was when I finally decided to leave. Sleep might dull reason, but there's a point where instinct screams louder than exhaustion. I grabbed my bag, pocketed the key, and stepped into the hallway. Every light above me flickered in sequence, one after the other, illuminating a tunnel of pulsing shadows down the stairs. The smell of mildew was thicker now, a damp, almost sweet rot. When I reached the lobby, it was empty. The counter light flickered weakly, reflecting off the wet tile. The manager's door was closed, but the hum I'd heard upstairs was louder now, vibrating through the floor. It had a rhythm, almost like breathing, or machinery mimicking human lungs. I knocked lightly on the office door. No response. I knocked harder, and the sound that came back wasn't from the door, but from behind me. Someone tapped, slowly, on the inside of the front lobby window. I turned. The fog outside pressed right against the glass, thick and solid as smoke. A handprint appeared on the other side, large, smudged, skin pale against the dark. Another pressed beside it, then another. They multiplied, forming a cluster of palms dragging slowly down, leaving faint streaks across the pane. I stepped back until my shoulders hit the counter. The air felt suffocating. The humming beneath the floor had risen to a near roar. I bolted for the front door, but when I pushed it open, a gust of warm, damp air met me, And beyond that, nothing. No rain, no cars, no sight of the highway. Just the glow of my car's headlights illuminating a parking lot that no longer looked right. The motel seemed shifted somehow, angled differently, stretching away into fog that swallowed the edges of the building. I sprinted to my car, yanked the handle, locked. Through the glass, I could see the keys still in the ignition, though I remembered pocketing them earlier. My reflection in the glass wavered faintly, delayed, like video feed out of sync. Behind me, the motel sign flickered to life again. It no longer read vacancy. It read stay. I ran. I don't remember how far I went before the world adjusted again, fog thinning, streetlights reappearing, sound returning in a rush. When I finally looked back, the road behind me was empty. No motel, no lights. Just an unbroken line of dark asphalt fading into rain. The next morning, I searched the address I thought I'd stopped at. Nothing came up. No listing, no building permits, just an overgrown lot beside a scrapyard 2 miles outside Aberdeen. Locals said there had been a small motel there before the 1990s, but it burned down after a boiler exploded in the basement. Faulty wiring, 8 dead. They said the owner stayed on site, refused to rebuild, and eventually vanished. After that, one old man at a diner told me, some folks swear they still see the lights. Place shows up sometimes when the fog rolls in, only to people stupid enough to be driving alone at midnight. He laughed after saying that, but didn't finish his coffee. His hand shook slightly as he set the mug down. I didn't tell him that when I checked my jacket pocket later, the brass key was still there. Room 8 etched into the tag. I hadn't noticed until I reached home that night. But the key felt warm, pulsing faintly against my skin. That hum from the floorboards of the motel returned for a moment in my ears before fading. For months afterward, strange things started happening during rainstorms. My radio would cut to static exactly at 12:11 a.m. once a week. My television, though unplugged, sometimes flickered briefly with the image of an empty parking lot, the timestamp frozen. And in the reflection of windows during foggy nights, faint shapes would appear, standing still behind me as if waiting for recognition. I eventually mailed the brass key back to the Aberdeen city office, sealed in a padded envelope with no return address. A month later, I got a package in my mailbox. No sender listed. Inside was a piece of scorched brass, half a motel key tag, melted and blackened from fire. The numbers on it faintly visible under the soot. Still 8. Now whenever I drive the Washington coast, I pay attention to the fog. Sometimes, along a silent stretch of highway at the edge of Aberdeen, I'll glimpse that same neon flicker through the mist, the faint red promise of vacancy. I've never stopped again. I just drive faster, though the radio usually hums low in the static, like a far-off engine idling beneath water. Some nights, when the fog builds thick over my street, I swear I hear that same slow humming under the floorboards of my home. It fades if I move toward it, like distance doesn't matter, only attention. Once, at 12:11 sharp, my power flickered off for just a second. When it came back, the reflection in the black screen of my television wasn't my living room. It was the motel lobby. Empty, golden lit, doors closed. That key was the last physical thing linking me to that place. Oh, yet somehow I still feel like I never checked out. Maybe none of the guests there ever did. Maybe the Aberdeen Inn doesn't let people leave the way they came because it isn't a building anymore. It's a habit, a shape reality takes when you're too tired, too lost, or too curious. Once you've seen its sign glowing through fog, it remembers you. Always waiting at 12:11, room ready, door unlocked, floor humming like a living thing beneath your feet. So if you ever find yourself driving through Aberdeen late at night and spot a red neon sign buzzing behind a curtain of fog, keep going. Don't glance at the windows, don't slow down, don't look for the clerk behind the counter. Because if the Aberdeen Inn appears for you, it means there's already a vacancy waiting. And when you step inside, the door locks quietly, not to trap you, but to make sure no sound escapes ever again. There's a pedestrian bridge on Snoqualmie Pass that crosses over the interstate. A narrow steel walkway connecting two trailheads high above the snow line. During the day, hikers and travelers pass over it without a thought. But at night, especially in winter, it sits silent, surrounded by fog and the echo of passing semis below. Locals call it the Boys Bridge. The name came long before anyone remembered the real story behind it. But among truckers and rescuers, the legend never died. I drove that road more times than I can count. The sweeping mountain highway between North Bend and Ellensburg has always had something melancholy about it. Its tall evergreens leaning over the wet pavement, its fog layered like smoke rising from unseen fires. I'd heard about the boy on the bridge for years, but the first time I actually saw something, it changed the way I thought about all of it. It was early February. Snow still hanging in patches along the shoulders, the kind of night where the light from your own headlights feels suffocating because it reflects back at you through the fog. I was heading east, around mile marker 52, when a faint shape appeared above, a thin silhouette against the reflection of my high beams. Someone was standing on the pedestrian bridge, leaning slightly over the railing. I thought it was a trick of the fog at first. A tree branch, maybe, or distortion caused by the mist. But then it moved, just a slight tilt of the head downward, as though watching the cars pass. When I looked back through the rearview mirror seconds later, the bridge was empty. The story came into focus later. After a visit to a maintenance worker named Hal, who had worked those hills since the 1990s, he told me that around 1996, a young boy, 8, maybe 9, had gone missing during an early season snowstorm near that area. His family had been camping close to Hiak, a small dot of a town near the pass, when the storm rolled in unexpectedly. They'd searched for him for 3 days before search crews called it off. They never found the boy's body, only his bright red scarf tangled in the roots near the bridge. What made the story linger wasn't just the tragedy, it was what came after. Hikers began finding toys on the bridge in the years following. Tiny action figures, marbles, faded photos of children folded into plastic bags to protect them from snow. Sometimes they'd find printed photographs placed in the exact same spot every year. A child standing beside a cabin that no one recognized. No one ever saw who left them. Hal told me he'd worked night shifts, plowing snow off nearby trails, and had once seen a boy standing there around 3 a.m., hands clasped on the railing, no footprints in the snow behind him. I hit the high beams, he said, and in that second, he looked down at me. Not scared, just disappointed. That word, disappointed, stuck to me. A year after hearing his story, I had my own reason to cross that pass again. A close friend had died young, and grief has a strange way of turning memory into a physical route. You start revisiting roads you once drove together, half hoping the world will flicker and restore what you lost. That night, the temperature had dropped well below freezing, and freezing fog hung low over the tree line. The snowbanks glowed faintly blue against my headlights. I reached the bridge near midnight. This time, I decided to stop. The turnout just past the bridge was completely deserted. When I stepped out of the car, the cold settled into my lungs immediately, sharp and clean. The only sound was the muted hiss of wind weaving through pine branches. I walked up the embankment toward the bridge, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. The fog was dense, but not silent. It had weight, like the air itself was holding its breath. The bridge's steel grating groaned under each step. My light illuminated patches of frost, old graffiti names, and rust climbing the rails like vines. In the center of the walkway sat a small arrangement, a toy car, frozen into ice beside a piece of laminated paper. I knelt down, wiped the frost from the paper, and revealed a photo of a boy wearing a winter coat and a bright red scarf. Beneath it, in tiny, shaky handwriting, were 4 words: "Still waiting on Dad." The cold numbed my fingers. For a long time, I couldn't stand. The bridge seemed impossibly silent. Even the passing noise from cars below had dulled, like the snow swallowed them whole. Then, faintly, came a sound I can only describe as humming. A child's tune, quiet, uncertain, drifting from somewhere beside me. I turned slowly, flashlight cutting through fog that now seemed alive with colorless movement. No one was there. But against the thin layer of frost on the metal railing, I noticed small handprints, 4 of them, pressed clear into the ice, darker than the rest. I reached out reflexively and felt warmth radiating from the spot as though someone had only just touched it. That's when the humming stopped. Behind me, on the other side of the bridge, faint footprints appeared in the snow, too small to belong to an adult, leading halfway across the walkway and stopping abruptly at the center where I stood. And then I heard it. Soft footsteps crunching slowly toward me, one after another. I couldn't move. The air buzzed with static. I spoke without knowing why. "You're safe, okay? You're okay." The fog thickened again, swirling around me. For one brief second, a shape materialized through it. A small figure standing near the end of the bridge, wearing a hood, a red scarf trailing behind him. The scarf swayed though the air was still. His face was shadowed, but his posture was calm, even serene. When I blinked, he was gone, leaving only the faint smell of smoke and pine sap. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I returned in daylight. The bridge looked ordinary again. Footprints gone, toy car frozen completely solid, the laminated photo half buried under fresh snow. I took a picture of the scene, but when I checked the image on my phone, it showed something different. The photo and toy replaced by a neatly folded scarf, red, unworn, lying in a patch of sunlight. I checked again minutes later. The photo was gone. When I showed the picture to Hal the following week, he looked shaken. He said the original scarf had been kept by the boy's father for years, displayed at home as a reminder. The man died in 2012. The family buried the scarf with him. "Maybe," said Hal quietly. The boy came to get it back. The story didn't leave me after that. It grew roots, wrapping around smaller parts of my life, until it resurfaced months later in the strangest way. One night in early autumn, long after the snow had melted, someone slipped a plain envelope under my apartment door. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, color-drained, taken from an angle overlooking the same bridge. In the photo, I could see myself standing in the center of it, flashlight in hand, fog curling around my shoulders. Behind me, faintly visible near the far railing, was a small figure wearing red. I don't own a camera capable of that shot. I never told anyone except Hal. He said search crews and hikers occasionally see the boy along the bridge in early winter and late fall, times when fog moves between temperature layers as though the world momentarily remembers what vanished inside it. "It's always the same," he said. "He doesn't hurt anyone, he just watches. But sometimes he leaves things behind, like he's trying to remind us he's still part of the story." A month later, during one of those heavy Pacific Northwest rains that sound like ocean waves colliding with land, I drove across Snoqualmie again. I didn't intend to stop, but part of me needed to see if the boy was still there. If the mountain had swallowed him for good, or if he would keep returning, suspended in the space between loss and memory. The road was slick with water, fog bending like smoke under passing headlights. As I neared the bridge, a flicker of red caught my eye. Movement high above, quick but undeniable. I eased onto the shoulder, turned off my lights, and waited. Through the fog, faint glow shimmered on the pedestrian rail. Then I saw it again. The figure, clear as day against the white mist. A child, motionless, staring down at the road. Just before he vanished, the scarf unfurled in the wind, trailing like a ribbon of blood through the fog. I sat there long after he disappeared. Something about that sight didn't frighten me. It hollowed me out, an ache more than a panic. Because whatever that was, a ghost, a memory, an echo of grief, it wasn't trapped. It was repeating, yes, but not suffering. It was remembering. And maybe that's what hauntings really are. In the years since, drivers have continued mentioning him, a boy seen standing on the bridge during late-night storms, always silent, never waving, just looking down. Some claim that if you stop your car and stand beneath the bridge, you'll sometimes find a red scarf fluttering from the rail. When you climb up to retrieve it, it's gone. Others say they've found Polaroid photos tucked between the bolts, pictures of families camping or smiling children whose identities don't match any missing person reports. The strangest reports, though, come from those who linger too long. They say you can hear faint laughter echoing through the steel grating, even when heavy snow covers the bridge. Sometimes the laughter's followed by words, soft, high-pitched, almost playful. "Still waiting." I went back there one last time last winter. The fog was so thick I almost missed the turnoff entirely. I parked below, headlights off, and climbed the embankment again. Snow coated the ground, untouched. When I reached the middle, I saw something glinting beneath the ice, a red thread, buried shallowly between two boards. I dug it out with numb fingers and found another photo beneath it. Not of the boy, but of the bridge itself, clean, flooded with morning sun. Someone had written on the back, "Snow melts, but roads remember." I still keep that photo on my desk. Every now and then, on winter nights, I'll catch the faint flutter of something red outside my window, though I live miles from any mountains. Whether it's reflection, memory, or something lingering more real than both, I never know. The only thing I'm certain of is that some echoes don't fade. They change shape until someone listens long enough. So maybe the boy still waits. Or maybe he's part of something older, the mountain's way of remembering what it lost. Either way, when the fog settles deep through Snoqualmie and the highway hums like a river of metal through the dark, it's best to keep your eyes on the road and your music low. Because somewhere above, unseen through the mist, a small figure still stands on the bridge. Red scarf trailing against the wind, watching every car pass and hoping one of them might finally stop. And maybe, for just a second, it's not the boy watching you. It's the mountain watching through him, whispering softly over the noise of the wind. Still waiting on Dad. It started as a humming, barely a vibration at first, the kind that vanishes if you tilt your head. But it grew louder, until it wasn't behind us anymore. It was in the car, inside the metal and fabric, in the air, in our throats when we spoke. There were 3 of us driving back from Idaho that January. Me, Mark, and his sister Leah. We'd spent a week chasing cheap snowboarding runs and empty trails, all laughter and bad coffee. By the time we hit Highway 12, winding through the dark forest toward the coast, we were ready to be home. The sky had collapsed into rain clouds that pressed low against the mountains, turning the road into a ribbon of gray water. The first time we heard it, we were somewhere west of Packwood. Leah noticed it before we did. "You hear that?" she asked, frowning. I turned down the radio. A low, steady hum vibrated through the car, deep, mechanical, like distant machinery. But there were no power lines, no factories, just forest and fog. Mark smirked. "Probably the tires. These chains rattle like hell." It sounded logical. Until the hum changed pitch, rising, lowering, echoing off invisible walls, as if moving around us. We listened in silence as it pulsed once, twice, and then stopped. That was the first night. By the time we crossed into Washington, it had returned. A constant low tone that seemed to drag behind the car like a tether. We kept blaming mundane things. Road friction, the speaker system, tinnitus. But every time we stopped, the noise didn't stop with the car. It floated over us, like pressure on the skull, sinking into bone. At a gas station in Randall around 11 p.m., I stepped out to stretch and realized my hands were shaking. The humming was faint under the sound of rain, but it was rhythmic now. 3 long pulses, one short, over and over, faint as a heartbeat under concrete. I glanced back into the car, and for a second, I thought I saw the rear window vibrate inward, like the sound had weight. Leah stayed quiet most of that distance, eyes wide, face pale. When I asked if she was okay, she said, "It feels like it's learning what we sound like." I didn't know what she meant, but neither did she. She just stared out into the fog, drifting through the tree line, where both of us swore something shifted each time the sound deepened. Around midnight, we hit a long, desolate stretch between small towns. No gas stations, no houses, just miles of dark forest pressed against the mountain walls. That's when the car radio flickered and turned itself on. Static flooded the speakers. Leah grabbed the dial instinctively, but the knob spun freely in her hand, disconnected. Beneath the static, a faint structure emerged. Tones mimicking speech, but shaping no words. Just vibration threaded with voice. Mark muttered, "It's interference," but his voice sounded hollow. The humming grew louder, weaving through the car like static underwater. When it finally stopped, all of us exhaled at once, an awkward trio pretending nothing happened. Then, Leah whispered, "It's inside the trunk." We turned toward her. She wasn't joking. Her eyes were locked on the rearview mirror. The sound was back, thudding softly, mechanical, slow, coming from the back of the car. Mark killed the engine. The noise didn't stop. It just kept pulsing. Slow and steady beneath the rolling fog outside. At first, we thought maybe the exhaust was making some weird resonance. Mark popped the trunk. I swung my flashlight inside. Nothing except wet luggage and the smell of rain-soaked air. But the hum was louder now. So deep it rattled the fillings in my teeth. The sound didn't have a source. It wasn't around us. It was through us. We slammed the trunk and drove. No one spoke. The rain thickened, smearing against the windshield in long, frantic strokes. At one point, Leah began to cry quietly, hands pressed against her ears. "It doesn't stop when I do this," she whimpered. "It's under everything." The worst stretch was near Morton. There's a long pass there where the trees grow tight and the road dips so sharply your stomach drops. As we descended, the noise shifted pitch again, becoming almost human, like voices caught inside an engine or a choir humming without air. I remember gripping the steering wheel until my hands went numb. For 6 straight minutes, no one said a word. Then the sound simply faded, leaving our ears ringing. We reached civilization by dawn, every fluorescent gas station light feeling unreal. Leah refused to get out of the car. While Mark went inside to buy food, she stared at the dashboard clock. It blinked 4:14 over and over, stuck in repetition. When he came back, she was whispering, "It's not done following us." Over the next days, that line stuck with me, though I didn't want to believe her. The drive home should have ended it, but it never really did. For 2 days, things quieted. The car seemed normal again. But by the 3rd night, it came back. Inside the house this time. Faint, just beneath the frequency of normal hearing, vibrating more than sounding. My speakers would hum, even when unplugged. The refrigerator seemed to pulse in sync with it. I lay in bed that night listening as the sound built slowly until my walls trembled. I called Mark the next morning. He sounded brittle, exhausted. "Leah's hearing it too," he said, "and it's not in her head. The whole apartment hums." He laughed dryly, like someone trying to make a joke feel safe. Every clock's frozen at 4:14. I didn't sleep that night. I remember checking the power meter outside, completely normal. No surges, no hum. I stood in the dark yard, barefoot, shivering in winter air. But the vibration came from the ground itself, traveling upward through my legs, pulsing between bones. It wasn't mechanical anymore. It felt alive. Over the next week, things escalated. The sound began syncing with us, matching our breathing rhythms, our speech patterns. When I'd breathe in, it would fade. When I exhaled, it'd swell slightly, as though responding. I recorded it once in the living room. The playback revealed something worse. Beneath the tone, buried under layers of static, were whispers. Not words, but drawn-out breaths shaped like imitation. Every attempt to isolate them made the file distort, as if resisting analysis. Meanwhile, Leah stopped answering calls. When I drove to their apartment, the blinds were drawn tight. Mark finally opened the door after I pounded for several minutes. He looked hollow-eyed, skin sallow. The entire place was dim, quiet, yet buzzing faintly in the air, like electricity leaking through unseen wires. Leah sat on the couch, head in her hands, humming softly in a low, steady tone, the same pattern we'd heard on the road trip. I backed away slowly, whispering to Mark, "You need to get her help." He shook his head. "We tried. The doctor said tinnitus, said stress could make her hear things. But that doesn't explain why I'm hearing it too." He glanced around the room, as though expecting the walls to breathe. "You ever think maybe it's not a thing in our ears? Maybe it's something looking for resonance?" He tapped his chest, like it wants to use us to keep itself alive. I wanted to call him crazy, but I couldn't, because even as he spoke, the floor beneath us vibrated faintly, subtly matching the cadence of his voice. I left that night and never went back. 2 days later, he called me again, 2 a.m., whispering. "It stopped outside," he said. "Now it's just inside her. I can't and then silence. When I called back, no one answered. When police investigated days later, they reported an unexplained power surge localized to their building. No signs of violence, just what they called prolonged carbon monoxide exposure. No neighbors reported smell, no fault found in the detectors. Both were found sitting on the living room floor, leaning against each other, eyes closed. No struggle, no pain. Like they heard something only they could understand. They ruled it accidental. I'm not sure what I believe. After the funeral, I started keeping notes. Every night around the same time, 4:14 a.m., I still feel the faint vibration under my bed. Some nights it fades quickly, others it lingers long enough to rattle picture frames. I haven't used my car in months. I hear it outside sometimes too. Distant, almost comforting in its rhythm. Experts talk about infrasound, low frequencies just below the human hearing range that cause unease, nausea, even hallucinations. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe something in those mountain valleys holds sound differently, bending it, trapping it, until it unravels along highways like a thread too taut to snap. But sometimes, when fog settles thick in my neighborhood, the sound gets stronger. I'll stand near the window and swear it's moving, closer 1 minute, distant the next, circling the house like an unseen vehicle. The pattern never changes. 3 long pulses, 1 short. A researcher I emailed once told me something unsettling, that certain harmonic patterns can cause human tissue to vibrate microscopically in sync with external frequencies. He said, if you're exposed long enough, your heartbeat can mimic it. The hum, he wrote, can fold itself into your biology. Lately, that thought keeps me awake, because I've started catching myself humming without realizing it. Same rhythm, same tone, sometimes while cooking, sometimes at work. Once, while brushing my teeth, I caught my reflection moving slightly out of sync, like the glass hummed differently. The vibration isn't constant. It comes in waves, alternating between days of silence and sudden surges so strong my vision blurs at the edges. I can't record it anymore. None of my devices pick it up now. But sometimes I'll answer a random phone call and hear faint static on the other end, perfectly timed to my pulse. Last week, I found an old CD in the glove compartment of Mark's abandoned car. The case was blank, no label. Against my better judgment, I played it. The speakers buzzed. 3 long hums, 1 short, looping over and over. Halfway through, a faint voice joined, buried in the noise. It sounded like Mark, whispering, "Don't listen." I ejected the disc, but even after, the pattern kept echoing through the speakers, unpowered, faint, endless. Since then, the humming never stops. It hides under noise, beneath the hum of my refrigerator, the distant traffic, even my own voice. It follows me from room to room, like breath that never quite leaves. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night with a taste of metal in my mouth, and the air feels thicker, denser, as if something enormous hums miles beneath the surface, calling through soil and concrete. The sound becomes almost language, a physical whisper vibrating through bone. And though I never quite make out the words, I understand the meaning. It's not done traveling yet. They say sound dissipates with distance. But what if some sounds don't fade? What if they grow by finding containers, voices, engines, walls, to carry them farther? Maybe that's what it was all along, not a haunting, but a contagion, and we were just the next surface it needed to vibrate through. Sometimes, when I turn off all the lights and cover my ears, I swear I can hear a car idling faintly outside. engine humming that same rhythm. Sometimes it stops right under the window, purring low, patient, like it's waiting for someone to open the door. And when I finally fall back asleep, I dream of that road again. Fog swallowing the mountains, headlights flickering through rain, and somewhere behind it all, the sound patiently following. It always catches up eventually. There are places in Oregon where silence feels alive. Waldo Lake is one of them. 30 square miles of crystal water so still it mirrors the clouds perfectly, ringed by forest that drowns sound. Even the wind there moves differently. It doesn't rustle, it whispers. It carries the weight of something that's listening back. I learned about the lake years ago, during a volunteer trip that never stayed on schedule. Back then, I was part of a small wilderness conservation group sent to clear debris from a service road that supposedly looped around the lake. The route was closed after seasonal flooding, but county records hinted at a lost trail system stretching deep into an unmanaged section of forest. Our job was simple: mark the path, take photos, and map the terrain before the next ranger rotation. There were 4 of us that year. Me, Sam, the kind of man who never stopped talking, a geologist named Harper, and Milo, a quiet local who barely spoke unless asked directly. He was the only one who'd lived near Waldo all his life. When we stopped for fuel near Oak Ridge, the attendant asked where we were headed. The moment we mentioned the lake's southern road, his face hardened. "That route's not marked anymore," he said flatly. "Not since '89. "What happened in '89? Sam asked with a smirk, ready for folklore. The man shook his head. "You should ask the forest first," and stepped back into the station. We thought he was joking. By early afternoon, we reached the old gravel road, cutting through pines so dense the light dimmed 10 degrees immediately. A fog hung low over the treetops, soft and silver. It wasn't the kind that moved. It hovered, thick but calm, resting like breath above still water. The further we drove, the weaker our GPS signal became. Harper laughed it off. "Magnetic fields," she said. "Volcanic layers underneath this whole area. It screws with compass readings." By dusk, the trail markers dwindled. We found an opening just wide enough for tents and parked beside the ruins of what looked like an old maintenance station. Half collapsed, roof gone, concrete slab cracked with moss veins. That evening, the lake glowed faintly under moonlight, still as glass. You could see straight to the bottom, every polished stone, every drowned branch. Milo broke his silence after hours of us sitting around the lantern. "They say the lake doesn't have a floor," he murmured. None of us laughed. "They say it goes down forever. Not water, something else below all that clarity." I couldn't tell if he was teasing us or warning us. That night, sleep didn't come easily. The silence pressed too close. No crickets, no wind, not even the quiet ripple of water. Half awake, I heard something, a faint, mechanical rhythm far down the shoreline. At first, I thought it was our own camp cooler humming, but when I checked, it wasn't. The sound came from across the water, a steady, pulsing tone, soft as foghorn echo, repeating every 12 seconds. Harper rose too. "You hear that?" she whispered. We stood on the shore staring into the fog. The sound repeated, a deep swell somewhere across the invisible center of the lake. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The stillness afterward felt heavier, like the lake was listening to whether we noticed. In the morning, Milo was gone. His tent was still zipped, his pack, boots, and jacket all inside. Only his flashlight and notebook were gone. The only footprints led down the embankment toward the waterline, then stopped abruptly. The gravel there was oddly smooth, undisturbed, save for an impression shaped almost like tire treads leading out into the shallows. Harper radioed for help. No response. The signal crackled, caught, and cut back into that same rhythmic tone we'd heard overnight. Sam cursed under his breath. We spent the day searching what little shoreline we could, shouting his name until our throats went raw. No echo came back, not even the usual reflection of sound bouncing off the forest. Everything swallowed noise faster than it left our mouths. Even shouting felt wrong here. By the second evening, unease had rooted deep in us. We built a fire out of habit more than comfort. Sam started saying weird things, half under his breath, something about not being on any real map anymore. He held his phone up, showing us a screen with only blank green, no GPS signal, no grid. "Look," he said, voice shaking. "Look where it says we are. Nothing. Nowhere." Just before midnight, another sound joined us, distant but deliberate. The low hum again, now accompanied by what sounded like rolling gravel. A slow, mechanical grind beneath the stillness, as though stone were being crushed in a rhythm. We turned our lights toward the water and saw faint reflections shimmering far out across the lake. Two small points moving steadily in parallel. "Headlights," Harper whispered. "But there's no road." The points drifted closer, cutting thin wakes across the glassy surface. I realized then, they weren't lights moving toward us. They were reflections of something above. When we looked up, fog had reshaped into thin vertical lines glowing pale blue against the clouds, like the outlines of a roadway hanging overhead. It ran directly above the water's surface before fading into distance on both sides. The hum intensified. Before we could react, the camp lantern flickered wildly, then went dark. All that remained was the faint luminescence of the lake and those two light points far out. The air temperature dropped instantly, enough to mist our breaths. I turned toward Harper to speak, but she wasn't there anymore. Her flashlight lay on the ground, still on. The beam cut upward, revealing faint handprints pressed into the tent fabric. Inside, not out. I froze. Sam began to panic, spinning slow circles. Breathing ragged. "We need to leave," he said. "Now." We shoved what little gear we could into the back of the truck and started the engine. The radio lit up immediately, blasting static so loud it distorted into pain. Beneath the noise, something faint but structured pulsed through. The same rhythm we'd heard from across the lake. But now it wasn't distant. It was inside the static, morphing between tones, forming syllables we couldn't understand. Sam covered his ears. "Turn it off!" But before I could, the headlights died. The dashboard went black, and the truck stalled. Silence again. Outside, the fog had risen back from the lake, creeping across the shore and wrapping the vehicle in a cold film. The rhythm outside returned, closer this time. 3 beats, a pause, and one long tone. It vibrated through the frame of the truck. Through the seats, through bone. I gripped the steering wheel, too terrified to move. Then faintly through the mist, we saw movement along the waterline. Dozens of faint shapes standing ankle-deep, facing the lake. Not people. Not exactly. Lined silhouettes, all motionless, outlines barely discernible. It was like shadows projected in fog, every one of them facing away from us. Heads slightly bowed, Sam whispered, "Milo?" The rhythm from the lake grew louder, the hum blending into something resembling breathing or chanting. The figures by the water began to shimmer slightly, edges rippling. For a moment, I swore I saw their outlines flicker, replaced by images of vehicles sunken half beneath the shoreline, lights blinking faintly underwater. One after another. Sam bolted from the truck. I screamed for him to wait, but his figure dissolved almost instantly after he crossed into the fog. His footsteps faded, replaced by 2 wet splashes. Then silence. I don't remember falling unconscious. But when I came to, dawn had already broken. The fog lifted to reveal nothing. No camps, no footprints, no truck, no road behind me. Only a thin path of flattened grass leading down to the water. Waldo Lake looked the same as always, perfectly clear, perfectly still, hiding depth too immense to be real. I walked until my legs gave out, until rescue crews found me days later on the western trailhead, exhausted and delirious. They told me I'd been missing 3 days. When I explained what happened, about the missing 3 people, about the sounds, no remains were found. Not a single boot print, not a torn fabric, not a trace of them anywhere in the forest or water. Only one object was recovered. Harper's field camera, discovered in shallow water near where we'd camped. When the photos were printed, most were blank from water damage. But one survived, taken from an angle roughly near the shore at night. In the center of the frame was the lake, the reflection of those same thin blue lights descending from the fog, mirrored perfectly in the water. Across the bottom edge of the photo, written in faint pen, were 3 words: "Road still moving." I left the group after that. I stopped volunteering for wilderness mapping. For years, I avoided even reading about the Cascades. Still, the memory clings, resurfacing in dreams. Sometimes, I hear the same low-frequency hum in everyday machinery. A refrigerator compressor, the rumble of an airplane, the growl of distant traffic. It always comes in the same sequence. 3 short pulses, 1 long. Last summer, I visited Oak Ridge again for the first time since it happened. I told myself it was closure. I stopped by the same gas station, the same attendant still there. Just older now, slower. When he recognized me, his expression darkened. "You went out there, didn't you?" he said quietly. I nodded. "How did you know?" He sighed, looking out at the forest line. "Because they never seal that road. Every few decades, somebody drives it after freeze-thaw breaks shape again. People always think it's a service track, always end up hearing it before they see it." "Hear what?" I asked. "The road," he said. "The one that never stopped moving after the flood landslide buried it in '89. Couldn't fill it in. They tried for weeks, but every morning, new cracks, new path cutting a little deeper toward the lake. Machinery stopped working within miles of it. Some engineers said it wasn't land at all. It was hollow earth shifting in resonance with the water. Like something under there breathes different." He leaned back on the counter, eyes fixed on me. "If you heard it humming, then it already marked you. You'll know when it's near again. The air gets quiet, then the tone starts under your ribs. That's when you stay still. Because if you follow it, you'll never find a way back up." I left without saying anything else. But sometimes, on long night drives through Oregon's back roads, I catch the faintest vibration under the asphalt, steady, patient, humming in that same pattern. It never lingers long, it just passes through like memory carried by the ground itself. Some say Waldo Lake holds some of the clearest water on Earth. That's because there's nothing left alive in it. Not fish, not algae, not even sound. The locals say the purity comes from the depth swallowing every trace of noise until it smooths itself into silence. But I know better now. Nothing that deep ever stays still. because underneath all that glassy calm, something keeps breathing. An ancient rhythm crawling through the stone, finding new cracks, reshaping its root 1 inch at a time. And on quiet nights, when the mist settles low, it remembers those who tried to map it, and hums the pattern it taught us across the asphalt miles away, waiting to see which of us will listen long enough to follow. The last road through Waldo Lake never closed. It just sank beneath mirror water, still paved, still humming, all that weight of forest above it, learning to breathe.